Good evening to all of you and welcome to IPA50 New Horizon in Physics webinar series. Today we have a very special event. When we talk of New Horizons, we have to consider the gender aspect. And today's event has two parts. First, we have a lecture on the life of Dr. Anandibai Joshi by Professor Ram Ramaswamy. This will be followed by the panel discussion, which is on women in physics. Where do we go from here? And we have six eminent panelists. I request all people who are on Zoom to mute their mics to minimize the disturbance. And I now invite Professor Shobna Narsimhan from JNCSR, who who has been working very extensively on the subject of promoting women in science, to introduce today's speaker. Over to you, Shobna.
Uh, Thank you, Vandana. It is a pleasure to introduce Professor Ram Ramaswamy. Professor Ramaswamy is one of India's best-known scientists. He has had a stellar career both in research and in administration. He did his PhD in chemistry at Princeton University and a postdoc at Caltech. On his return to India, he worked first at TIFA Mumbai and then at JNU Delhi as one of the first members of the School of Physical Sciences. From 2011 to 2015, he was the Vice Chancellor of the University of Hyderabad. From 2016 to 2018, he was the President of the Indian Academy of Sciences, Bangalore. He currently holds a visiting position at IIT Delhi. He also writes a very interesting blog, which I encourage you to look up. Professor Ramaswamy has been an active supporter of efforts to increase diversity in general and gender diversity in particular in the scientific community. Together with Professor Rohini Godbole, he edited Leelavati's Daughters, a collection of autobiographical essays by Indian women scientists. If you haven't already read this book, I recommend that you do so. It's available on the website of the Indian Academy of Sciences. He was also a member of the Indian delegation to the International Conference on Women in Physics that was held in Stellenbosch, South Africa in 2011. These conferences are held once every 3 years, and every country is encouraged to include not just women, but also some men in its delegation. I should tell you that very often when we have approached men to ask them whether they would be willing to be a member of the Indian delegation, their reactions have ranged from disinterest to outrage. Professor Ramaswamy was a welcome exception. When we approached him, he agreed immediately and he contributed significantly to the success of the conference. Most recently, he has edited the book, A Fragmented Feminism, The Life and Letters of Anandibai Joshi, and he will be talking about her life today. Professor Ramaswamy, over to you.
Ram, you're muted.
Well, all the thanks that were expressed to Shobna. Let me thank you again, Shobna, for the very warm introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be here at the IPA special event today. As Shobna mentioned, I will be talking about Anandibai Joshi, who is India's first physician, although not, this is a physics association. So the reason why I'm talking about her is mostly because of the book that we brought out recently. But in preparing today's lecture and excerpting from the book and looking at the life, one is really struck by how little has changed in the last 150 or so years, and how much, of course, has changed. So let me start by sharing my screen. Okay. Will you just confirm that it's all visible?
Yes, please.
Right. This will ostensibly be about Anandibai Joshi, but it will also really be about the story of whom we may argue is the first Indian woman of science, or certainly one of the earliest Indian women of science. Anandibai Joshi was born in 1865 and she died in 1887 and is classified as India's first female physician. The book itself is largely based on this, the talk itself is largely based on this recent book, uh, A Fragmented Feminism, The Life and Letters of Anandibai Joshi by the late Meera Kosambi, who is Didi Kosambi's daughter. And it was edited by myself, Madhvi Kolatkar and Abhan Mukherjee. I know that Abhan is here attending the talk. I'm not sure that Madhvi is, but well, it's a pleasure to acknowledge the collaboration that brought this book out. Um, Now, Meera Kosambi had actually written or rewritten a chapter on Anandibai Joshi uh, in the volume A Girl's Guide to a Life in Science, which is a shorter version, if you like, of Leelavati's Daughters. And Anandibai's story is told in Leelavati's Daughters, although not, well, I mean, it is a complex life. And Meera Kosambi was passionate about the intellectual history and the intellectual and social history of Maharashtra in particular, and had written extensively on a variety of different topics. This book, as it happened, was her last was her last work, and she passed away in 2015 in February. Now, let me just very quickly recount the basic story of Anandibai Joshi. But because from the time she died in 1887, she's been in the public eye for a variety of reasons. There have been several biographies of Anandibai. One was written almost immediately after by Caroline Doll, and it appeared in the United States. It's called The Life of Dr. Anandabai Joshi, a kinswoman of the Pundita Ramabai. And in Marathi, Kashibai Kanetkar had written her life story, this life story of Anandibai. And this book is actually still in print. There was a chapter that appeared in Elizabeth Chapman's Sketches of Distinguished Indian Women in 1891. So, even though Anandibai's own life was remarkably short, she was a public figure by the end of the 19th century. In 1968, there was a biography in Marathi by Shrikant Joshi, and it was called Anandi Gopal. It was translated by Asha Damle into English and published later by Stree in Kolkata. Now, the story has then appeared in NCERT textbooks. She's been the subject of documentaries, films, and has been appropriated by various groups for various purposes. And most recently, the newly named Ministry of Education and the UGC have announced the establishment of the Anandibai Gopal Rao Joshi Chair in Medicine and Health as one of the 10 or 12 chairs named after famous Indian women scientists. Right. Oops. But as Meera Kosambi, who was a sociologist, her point was what is the real story of Anandibai Joshi? And I think that the reality of that story is very relevant to us even today. Here is a timeline of Anandibai's life. She was born as Yamuna Joshi in Pune in March 1865. And her family was from Kalyan. She was one of the middle children of a fairly large family, and she grew up almost as a tomboy. She was a wrestler and so on. But on her 9th birthday, she was married to Gopal Rao Joshi, who was a widower, somewhat older than her, and she was renamed Anandibai. She moved from Thane to Alibag with her husband, had a son in 1877 when she was, as you can see, a little over 12. The child died after 10 days, leaving an emotional scar on her. But by that time, she had started learning to write and read, and in English and Marathi. She moved to Kolhapur she homeschooled there with some instruction from missionaries of the American Presbyterian Mission. One of the people there was Robert Goheen's great grandfather, and Robert Goheen later came back to India as I mean, he was president of Princeton University, and then he was also significant in in a variety of different India-related activities. Gopal Rao was a fairly peripatetic gentleman, and so he moved from Kolhapur to Girgaon. Then he went to Bhuj and eventually went off to Serampur near Calcutta. And by the time this happened, Anandibai was about 15 or 16, and she had learned English, Marathi, Sanskrit, and had and expressed a desire to learn to study medicine. Um, a variety of things happened to make it possible for her to travel to the US in 1883, and she reached there in June. She was about 18 years old at the time. And then she was able to get admission to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia in September 1883. This college is still there. It's now part of Drexel University, and many of the photographs that you see illustrating this talk were provided by Drexel University, although many of them are also available on the net in different sources. In 1885, a little over 2 years, she wrote her thesis, Obstetrics Among the Aryan Hindus, and submitted it to the WMCP for the degree of Doctor of Medicine. This degree was, was granted in March of 1886, and she then took up an internship in Roxbury, Massachusetts. But due to ill health and other kinds of emotional pressure, she decided to cut short this training, and she came back to India, reaching India in November of the same year. Now, by that time, she was actually quite seriously unwell, and she was not able to take up the position of the physician in charge of the female ward at Albert Edward Hospital in Kolhapur. Her health declined considerably, and the Joshis moved from Bombay to Pune. And for complex reasons, they refused Western medicine. And she came to Pune and she grew weaker. And on the 26th of February, 1887, she died in Pune in the same house where she had been born. Now, this house was located in Chakravarpet, and the house has this blue plaque on it, and it houses the Bharat Gayan Samaj. When she died, she was a month under 22 years. So, the remarkably short life. And if you have a chance to, or many of you may have seen it, but in case you haven't, in the Kelkar Museum, which is not too far from where she was born and died, you can see this patchwork quilt that was sewn by Anandibai's American friends as a memento of her stay there and as a remembrance. So at this event where all the friends who had encouraged her and helped her in the US came together, they would stitch different little bits of cloth together. And her own contribution is a small bit of embroidery. And as a metaphor for her life, a quilt is just, absolutely appropriate because it was rich with experience, even though it was very short. Her death on the threshold of the work for which she was so well equipped, in the words of an eulogist at her cremation, was tragic. And her ambition to serve her unfortunate sisters by acquiring a medical education to ameliorate their plight was never fulfilled. Gopal Rao sent her ashes to the US, and these are kept in Poughkeepsie, New York, with other members of the Carpenter family. It's remarkable. Now, Uh, okay, so this is the story of Anandibai Joshi. Just the facts as so. But what is the reason? You know, how did an Anandibai come to be? The uh, the process of educating Anandibai happened at a time when the social reform movement in Western India was well underway. Anandibai was a young child in the late 1860s, and this was also, as it happens, about 10 years after the Indian War of Independence, the first one. Now, Gopal Rao had some complicated sort of ideas, but he had reformist beliefs and ideals. And his motivation, which was a complex one, he saw Anandibai's education as something that needed to be taken with extreme seriousness, mostly because one can infer that he recognized that she was very intelligent, and he also thought that it would bring a lot of attention to him. So, in the absence of a proper school, Gopal Rao started giving Anandibai regular lessons, including elocution practice. And he used to be quite violent towards her, as she writes later on. And Anandibai was to write at some other point in time that if I have received at all any schooling, it was only for a year when we were in Bombay, and it was a mission school. Now, seeing her rapid progress, Gopal Rao's ambitions grew even higher, and he planned to use her educational needs to further his own career. And in September of 1878, he presented his reformist credentials. As nothing is so important as female emancipation, education for our elevation morally and spiritually. Um, and then he also wrote a somewhat passionate letter to the Reverend Wilder of Princeton, New Jersey, saying that he was being hounded because of his reformist credentials, and so on and so forth. And then he ended this thing with this letter with an appeal to find suitable employment to enable him, if it please God, to take my wife to America for her being thoroughly educated. I mean, it should also be pointed out that at this time he was not so keen to become a Christian, and he was trying to find some way of getting to the U.S. without necessarily converting to Christianity. Now, Gopal Rao's letter was printed in a magazine called the Missionary Review. And this caught the eye of Mrs. Theodosia Carpenter, who decided to write to Anandibai. And this set out a voluminous correspondence of a voluminous amount, a copious amount of correspondence. And this eventually brought Anandibai to the US. Uh, Anandibai, and you can see one of the earliest photographs of her on the right. Uh, she writes to him, and this is where you see resonances with today. My husband is greatly inclined to send me to America for the purpose of my being thoroughly instructed in some practical knowledge, but he does not see his way to it. Suppose I come there with the intention of staying till I have passed one or two examinations, which will take more than 3 or 4 years. I am a vegetarian, and I do not wish to be Europeanized as regards my food and dress. Wherever I go, I wish to carry my manners and customs unless they are detrimental to my health. Do you think that I'll be able to live in your country in my own way? This is a letter from Anandibai to Mrs. Carpenter. The desire to go, sorry, the plan to go to America had to be set into effect quite quickly because Gopal Rao was a disaster in Calcutta, both socially and professionally. Their plans to move to the US grew firm, but Anandibai's health actually surfaced, and uh, she, I mean, she writes to Mrs. Carpenter that she ascribes the cause to the custom of early marriage, her general weakness. And so one thing led to another, and she said that she would travel alone to America And she writes that I'll see America, the dream of my life, and I will stand or fall as I deserve. I should point out for those who may not be entirely aware that these letters were written in English. They were not, translated later on, or So these were original letters written by a girl who had, who had learned the language only in the preceding 5 years or so. Now, there happened to be somebody in Calcutta who was in the missionary circuit, Anna Thoburn. They tried to arrange a chaperone for Anandibai to travel to the United States, and she writes somewhat patronizingly about Anandibai that she'll be a real curiosity. No doubt the first Hindu woman who has ever set foot on American soil. I trust my native land will deal kindly with her. Okay, and then she says she's a bright little woman, speaks English fairly well, and writes it better than I do. She will no doubt appear dull at first, as she will find it difficult to understand, but I think she'll get on well after a time. Then she was very, very right about her being bright and writing better than Anna Thoburn probably did. The first sort of articulation of Anandibai was that public articulation was a talk she gave in Serampur saying, why does she want to go to America? Her decision to travel to America and to travel alone caused a lot of problems for her because of Gopal Rao's own difficulties and the way in which they were all viewed in Bengal in those days. So the talk, which is actually written out somewhere, is she answers a few questions, and she says, "Why do I go to America to study medicine and provide much needed medical care to women, Indian and foreign, who are naturally averse to exposing themselves to treatment from male doctors?" Change some words here and there, and you can see that the words are still relevant. Are there no means to study in India? She says that in the solitary college at Madras and the midwifery classes in the three presidencies, the education to women is defective and insufficient. Also, the harassment to non Christian and non Brahmo women going to these is considerable. Why do I go alone? Just matter of fact, Gopal Rao has family responsibilities. Shall I be excommunicated when I return to India? This is in the context of crossing the oceans and losing your caste by traveling abroad and so on. So she says religious observances and social customs can be violated as easily within India as outside, so that being away makes no difference to a religious person. And what will I do if misfortune befall me? I rely on God for protection. And those of us who have lived a few years without insurance know exactly what that means. And why do what is not done by any of my sex? And you can see that this is a 17-year-old girl writing, every individual decides her own duties. She was a remarkably mature person for an 18-year-old. By this time, she had studied English, arithmetic, history. She spoke Marathi, Sanskrit, Bengali, Gujarati, Kannada, Hindustani, and English. She had actually even traveled to Delhi. And, as I've already mentioned, Pune, Alibag, Kalyan, Girgaon, Bhuj, Calcutta. So she was very unusual for a woman of her class. And when she reached America and was staying with Mrs. Carpenter, she wrote to Mr. Alfred Jones, "Dear sir, I beg to ask if upon any terms pecuniarily consistent with my means, I may be allowed to enter the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania for a thorough course of study. I have with me $70, and my husband expects to send me $20 per month, less the cost of sending." I was 18 years of age last March. The letter, and I will show you a reproduction of it at the end, is signed, yours gratefully, Anandibai Joshi. Within 2 years, she submitted a thesis to the WMCP, Obstetrics Among the Aryan Hindus. The loss of her child and the initial motivation for her to pursue a medical degree was never really far from her mind. The thesis itself is somewhat anecdotal. It's slight. It's 26 or 25 pages typed. Then it sort of recounts what are the things that we used to do for convulsions. You take hing and milk and preparation of garlic baths and so on. And then she says something which some people, not to mention who, should well read. I have not mentioned those principles, theories, and treatment in this paper, which are entirely out of practice in India. Although there are many valuable things with perhaps as many ridiculous ones, her spelling wasn't the best, ridiculous ones in our ancient medical and surgical literature. Some people would do well to read some of that. Anyway, the point is that this thesis was awarded the degree of Doctor of Medicine in 1886, and um, that was just when she decided to come back later that year. Okay. Let me just break from the story of Anandibai herself to point out that across the world, women entered the medical profession before breaching other academic bastions. Although, Laura Bassi is sort of categorized as the first physicist and first woman physicist, and she dates back to the late 1700s. She was a singular example. There weren't that many. Whereas in medicine, it turned out that actually many people all across the world were entering the profession at that time. Elizabeth Blackwell was the first woman doctor in the US in 1849. Elizabeth Anderson was the first in England in 1862. The first woman of color to get a degree was Rebecca Crumpler, and she graduated from the New England Female Medical College in 1864. This is just a year before Anandibai was born. The second Black woman was Rebecca Cole, and she graduated from the same college as Anandibai did in 1867. From India, it turns out that there were several women who all seem to have been born in the decade of 1860 to 1870. And these were remarkable people who entered the medical profession. In addition to Anandibai, there's Kadambini Ganguly. I'll describe all these in detail, but Rupabai Fardunji, Gurubai Karmarkar, Rukhmabai, Haimavati Sen, and Annie Jagannathan. Now, Kadambini Ganguly is considered, there's a little unnecessary controversy as to who was the first Indian doctor. It turns out that both of them actually got their degrees in 1886. Anandibai got one in Philadelphia, and it was whatever the degree was that of a doctor, whereas Kadambini's was not quite a doctor for some sort of unpleasant reasons. But she was born in a progressive Brahmo family in Bihar, and she got the BA from the University of Calcutta in 1882. After graduation, she actually practiced. And so she's really properly to be classified as the first person to have a practice in India, first Indian woman to have a practice. She even traveled to Edinburgh, qualified as the LRCP, and so on and so forth. She died in 1921 and had actually participated in the freedom movement as well. Okay. Rupabai Furdunji was, at least for me, when I was preparing this talk the first time, was a bit of a discovery. She was from Hyderabad, and she was the first woman all over the world to qualify as an anesthetist. Hyderabad was the first country to actually adopt, was the first country to legitimize the use of chloroform for, as an anesthetic. Rupa Bai was a very important member of that, the so-called Hyderabad Chloroform Commissions. She got her degree sometime in 1889. The degree was Hakim, and it was not an Orientalist degree. It's actually a modern medical degree. There were Englishmen teaching over there, thanks to the Nizam. And then subsequently, she went to Johns Hopkins, University of Edinburgh, and so she was serious. I mean, I've seen some of the books which describe her works. Very serious scientific work that she undertook, and she retired as superintendent of the Chadarghat Hospital in 1917 and died probably in the 1920s. There's remarkably little known about her more than this. Gurubai Karmarkar was a second person to graduate from the Women's Medical College of Philadelphia. But she was a Christian missionary, and she came back and worked in the American Marathi mission in Mumbai. She did fairly important work during the plague 100 years ago. Rahma Bai also is a name that we should know more about, in the sense that she actually sued her husband and did not wish to go and live with him because she had been married against her will. And this case went all the way up till Queen Victoria, this Bikaji versus Rahma Bai. And finally, she got a divorce. And she also changed the age of consent from 10 years to 12 years, but that itself was quite enough. She got an MD from the London Medical School in 1894, and then actually worked in Rajkot for decades, dying only in 1955. Another one of the names in this decade was Haimabati Sen, who was from, again, the Brahmo Samaj. She was widowed at the age of 10, but then she remarried and became a doctor in the Lady Dufferin program. Annie Jagannathan is one name which, again, very, very little is known about her, other than that she studied in the Madras Medical College, the same place that Anandibai, was somewhat disparaging about in her Serampore talk. But then she went to Edinburgh, got a triple qualification, and came back. But unfortunately, like Anandibai, she just died very soon after returning, so not much of a career. Again, not surprisingly, now the cluster effect is sort of apparent. There are some cases from Maharashtra, the Bombay presidency, the Madras presidency, and and Calcutta presidency. All these were the three sources where people were able to get this education. But the fact remains that it was only in the 1860s that all of them were born. Now, Anandibai has been feted not just in India, but also, as it turns out, in the US itself, in the American Women in Medicine, the American Women's Medical Association, the American Medical Women's Association honors honors their, some contemporary and some women physicians posthumously. So in 2002, they inducted or they induced, whatever the right word is there, Anandibai, along with Susan LaFlèche Picot, the first Native American woman, Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first woman of color, and Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman, all into their Hall of Fame. With her medical degree, Anandibai needed internship and training, but she couldn't largely because of Gopal Rao's continued presence in America and his behavior, which was bizarre. but there's not a talk about that aspect of her life. And her health worsened, and she finally accepted this offer from the Diwan of Kolhapur to get back to India. And unfortunate, I mean, this was really unfortunate because she undertook a strenuous journey in poor health. And as Meera Kosambi pointed out, after having been the unremarkable, unemployed, and eccentric husband of a much lionized Indian woman doctor, he was now once again the lord and master who could command obedience from his doctor wife to his prescription that all European medicines should be discontinued out of respect for Indian customs. After 3 years of intense medical training, Anandibai was to be reduced to the average submissive wife whose hard earned expertise could be overruled at will by her husband, who had no claim to medical knowledge in a matter of her own life and death. By the time the ship docked in Mumbai, Anandibai had reverted to her earlier Maharashtrian persona, a black 9-yard sari, blouse, nose ring, and ear studs. She lived for another 3 months. In 96, Meera Kosambi published an article where she rejected the patriarchal retelling of Anandibai's life, particularly by Shrikant Joshi's biography, which by that time, of course, had pervaded the popular imagination. The Maharashtrian psyche remains captivated by the image of Anandibai as a submissive and obedient girl wife who fulfilled her husband's visionary ambition for her. But reality and the book, The Fragmented Feminism, has a lot of the original source material. The series of images sketched by Anandibai's own words produce a self portrait in which the submissive wife coexists with an intelligent woman who is dispassionately perceptive of herself and her society. She goes on to say that Anandibai's conformist image overshadowed everything non-conformist about her for rather complex reasons. Tensions were inherent within the totality of her partially feminist private beliefs and between these and her largely conventional actions. If she made a progressive feminist statement through her medical studies in America to help ailing women back in India, she also made an emphatically conventional and anti feminist statement by conforming to the orthodox image of the ideal Hindu wife. She was as much her own creation as she was her husband's. She was not the Galatea to his Pygmalion. Gopal Rao's reformist credentials were inconsistent and whimsical, and Anandibai recognized this while remaining within the framework of the traditional marriage, ever grateful for his setting her off on the path of education. However, this is something that, after reading not just Meera Kosambi's text, but also what Anandibai had written and so on, her intelligence and vivacity is very difficult to contain. Her correspondence with Mrs. Kalpana Chakravarti fascinated. Her observations on Indian customs and social mores were acute, and her feminist position was undeniable. But she worked within the parameters of her marriage and the limits that she had set herself. And hence, Kosambi's description of this as a fragmented feminism that blended a clear headed reformist position with fierce nationalism and a committed position as a Hindu wife. Here's an image of the initial letter that she wrote to the people in Philadelphia, uh, and you can see her signature at the end. Yours gratefully, Anandibai Joshi. And with that, let me thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any specific questions.
Okay, thank you, Ram, for a fascinating talk. I think we'll first see if anybody who's on Zoom has questions. In the chat box, there's just one comment from Vandana. Vandana, do you want to say it out yourself? Vandana?
No, you can take the questions if that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, there's just a comment from Vandana which says there's a nice Marathi book on Rakhmabai, Mala hai lagna manya nahi. Okay. Uh, if anybody on Zoom wants to ask a question, they can unmute themselves and ask the question, perhaps. Are they allowed to unmute themselves, Vandana, or do we have to allow?
If it's possible, it's okay. We can see. We can help out. Yeah.
Okay, is there anybody who wants to ask a question?
I have a small question, comment.
Yeah, can you just identify yourself first, please,
Yeah,
and then ask the question?
Okay, let me also put on my video. Okay, this is Vivek Datar. I wanted to ask Ram, you know, is the correspondence that Anandibai had with Mrs. Carpenter all there or is available?
Yeah.
And does that bring out her, her inner feelings about this whole thing of getting
Absolutely.
educated?
No,
Why will she want to come back to India in that state of health?
Okay. See, all the correspondence is there, and Meera Kosambi actually collected all the original letters that the Carpenter family had kept. Just out of practice, they have kept all these letters. I think the reverse correspondence is not as complete. That is, the letters from the Carpenters to Anandibai, those are not complete because this is how we are, right? You see, Gopal Rao landed up, after letting her travel alone to America, Gopal Rao landed up for her graduation. And there he started making all sorts of very outrageous demands on her to, he accused her of all sorts of things, of having lost her. I mean, they were Brahmins, right? So there was a question of losing caste. There was, I think he was intensely jealous of her success. And even Pandita Ramabai had traveled to America for the graduation, and it was complicated, in the sense that these people were all there because of her, but they were also all jealous of her. And he would make her life very difficult, which others described around her. And so I think her decision to go back was partly because he was not leaving her alone. He just insisted that she should go back and not lose her caste, not lose whatever else. And they stood to make a lot more money by going to Kolhapur, which was a princely state at that time. And they would have made, it would have been a much better financial option for them. This is my feeling.
But is there any indication of what the problem was with her health? I mean, was it something like tuberculosis, or was it some other,
Yeah, it's suspected to have been tuberculosis.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anybody else on Zoom who has a question?
Nilima said something. I'm not sure what.
Nilima, you have a question? Okay, Nilima has written, can you say something about her interaction with Ramabai?
See, Ramabai was her cousin. Okay, as you know, in some kinship, Ramabai. Okay, just very briefly about Pandita Ramabai. Pandita Ramabai was widowed very early, and she then converted to Brahmo, or she became a Brahmo Samaji and married a person from Bengal. She and Anandibai didn't know each other very well. But they met and were interacting strongly when Anandibai was in Serampur in Calcutta. At that time, Ramabai had become widowed. So Anandibai's family and Anandibai and Gopal Rao were of some kind of support to Pandita Ramabai. Now, Pandita Ramabai wanted also to do medicine, but for reasons of poor health, or sort of, I think her vision wasn't good enough, and so she wasn't allowed to become a doctor. So, but she was living in the in the UK at that time. She was in England. When she realized that that Anandibai was going to graduate, the Pandita traveled to America and was present in March 1886 in Philadelphia and to see Anandibai get her degree. And she also wrote a book called The High Caste Hindu Woman, which is dedicated to Anandibai on that. The relationship was, I would say they were not close, and they probably didn't even know each other that well. But Ramabai was fairly ambitious and was, working for a variety of causes. So, um, I think she saw Anandibai as somebody whose fame she could also capitalize on.
Okay, I will now hand over to Vandana, who will ask you some of the questions from YouTube.
Yeah, thank you, Shobna. A really wonderful talk, Ram. And just a small addition, since you talked about Rakhmabai, and is there that, as I said, there is this book in Marathi which talked about her, which says that she doesn't agree with the marriage. But there was also thing which came out was that even the lot of caste influence, because she says that she even didn't get, I mean, the Rakhmabai, that not get much support from people like Nyamurti Ranade, who were trying to help women and women's education.
Hmm.
So that was there. Yeah. So there
Yeah,
are.
no, if I can just make a comment, Vandana,
Yeah.
the thing is that, the intersection of caste and gender is sort of really complicated because,
If I can just break in, can everybody mute except for the speaker, please? Thanks.
right. No, I was just saying that the intersection of caste and gender is very complicated because Rakhmabai was, I mean, unlike most of the other protagonists in the story who are Brahmins of one kind or the other, Rakhmabai was not a Brahmin. She I forget the name of the caste, but Chiplunkar. I'm not sure. I mean, it was some non. But I
Yes,
mean,
it
it
was
was
not
certainly
upper caste. It was something very, very different
very,
strata
very
of
different.
society. Yeah.
But the reason why okay, part of it is that I realized there were all these remarkable women in the 1860s who were born, but each one of them contributed in small but very significant ways to the position of women today.
Sure.
Going from 10 to 12 for the age of consent does not seem like much, but it was 20%. If you like.
The fact that somebody even was asking, trying to make that change was a remarkable thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so maybe we move on to the questions from YouTube. So we have two
Can I add
questions from
something?
Ajit
Sorry.
Srivastava. Yeah, Rohini, yes, please go ahead.
No, I typed it in the chat. I wanted to say that if I remember right, Mahadev Govinda Ranade, who became one of the first Indian justices in Bombay,
Yes.
actually piloted the case, the change in the law
Yeah.
after because of Rakhmabai's case.
Yeah, no, this is a very famous case. Queen
Sammati
Victoria.
Vacha.
Not just the case, but I mean, I remember that he piloted the whole thing because of that. And it was when an Indian became the justice. I think he was one of the first Indian chief justices at that time. He piloted the whole change in the law that you're talking about.
Okay, so maybe we take a couple of questions on the YouTube and then come back to Zoom again. So Ajit Srivastava has two questions. He says, is there any award instituted on her name?
Um, well, there is this Ministry of Education chair in the name of, at least in half her name, Anandi Gopal Rao Joshi. I mean, it's no, other than this, I think there are some awards. I seem to recall Rohini telling me once that the state of Maharashtra had instituted something for.
I was about to say that
Yeah.
the state of Maharashtra has instituted an award in her name, again for in the whatever health ministry, women and health ministry.
Okay.
It exists. I mean, I have seen it's being awarded.
His second question is, can you please give your assessment of the TV serial Anandi Gopal?
As I said, her story has been appropriated by various people for various reasons. Um, I think that very few, I think that the standard line is not as accurate as they believe it is. There are many aspects of it, and actually, my collaborator Aban has something to say about it. So, if Aban is there, I would request her to say some, say, this was a question that was asked to us at the Asiatic Society as well. Um,
Uh,
uh, yeah,
Hello, can you? I haven't seen the TV serial, but I saw the film on Anandi Gopal, the Marathi film, which I found better than what I thought I would find it, but also misleading in some ways because it made out as if Gopal Rao and she and the children were on the verge of becoming Christians, and Gopal Rao was encouraging her to convert, and they were in front of a priest in a church, and then she storms in and says, I will never become a Christian whatever happens. And then the whole audience, the whole hall, cinema hall, they all clapped and everyone was delighted with this, which was very misleading because this never happened. But
yeah.
what did happen was, in America, Gopal Rao at one point was very keen not to go back to India.
Oh, yeah.
And he wanted to Anandibai to settle down in America and work there as a doctor. And she said this was absolutely against her principles. She had become a doctor to help her sisters in India, the ones who needed help, the women of India, and she would go back whether Gopal Rao came with her or not. He could stay back in America. She would go and she would look after Gopal Rao's family and earn her living as a doctor in Kolhapur. So you do see how misleading popular a popular take on Anandibai can be,
Yeah.
and how it is lapped up by people who don't know better. So,
I should also add, Aban, like I did add at the other talk, that when after Anandibai's death, Gopal Rao actually converted to Christianity for a few
yes,
days. Uh,
quite right.
he converted and then he unconverted, all within a 3-week period, or
Correct. I forgot that. Yes, very true.
I was about
Yeah.
to add that.
Thank you, Aban.
And welcome.
So we move on to the next question. It's by Shikha Verma. Where did Anandibai get ideas of, where from she got the ideas of feminism?
I don't think she got ideas of feminism explicitly, but her position was a feminist position because she looks at agency. She had her own independent thoughts about how certain things should be done. She had her own reasons for doing things which were outside what were prescribed for her by Gopal Rao. I think, and that is the way in which Meera Kosambi interpreted her as a feminist, if you like. There was no other explicitly stated suffragette or any other kind of position. Uh, all over the world, the fact that women were entering professions which were hitherto closed to them, that was also part of a general social reform. So I mean, the word feminism, of course, is sort of more commonly used with the last century rather than with the one prior to that. So I would say that she didn't articulate them as feminist positions, but when you read her letters and her statements and you see the actions that she did, I mean, she traveled on her own to the United States as the first woman to set foot in America, first Indian woman to set foot in America without a chaperone. Right? Just that, you know, we don't send our kids on a train to to some unknown place saying just meet a few people on the compartment and go and sit. We don't do that now, and this was done in 1883.
So in interest of time, we need to wrap up. So we'll take two last questions, one from YouTube, and maybe then I'll ask Shobna to take one back from Zoom. So there's a question from Indulekha. I didn't fully understand it, but let me see what best I can make out of it. So she's saying that even today, there is some countries have this situation which keep the minimum age for marriage below 10 years. So whether the women who go for higher studies go in for medicine in empathy of obstetric difficulties faced by wives too young for childbearing.
It's difficult. I think it's a little difficult because, in the countries that allow child marriage at that age, I'm not even sure which countries are allowing it legally. Probably the United States. In some states of the US will
maybe some Gulf areas.
Illegal or something like that. No, I don't actually either have data or anything to say. I can just see a point over here that Amol has asked.
Yeah, so I wanted to come back to Zoom there. Yeah, sure. So yes, go ahead with Amol's question.
Amol said that, the thesis, whether it was based on what she knew from experience, it does seem like that. The thesis is very slender, Amol. It's 25 type pages. And I don't know whether you missed what I showed. The rest of it looks exactly like this. That, a plaster of mustard is put on people, and, it was just almost anecdotal. All right. I suspect that she would have tried to reinforce it with a certain amount of work because she was very observant and she was actually fairly honest in her observations over there. But I don't think that it really required a lot of research.
Okay, Bulumoni has a question. She's asked, was Anandibai treated for her poor health condition when she was in America?
There is no evidence that it was, she was, I think that she did see doctors for poor health generally, but the severity of the illness, I don't think that it was either diagnosed properly as tuberculosis or that she received any serious treatment over there.
Okay, I see that Amol has another question. He said that given that Gopal Rao's stint in Bengal was a disaster, the $20 per month promise sounds quite strange. Was he otherwise well-to-do, or were there any other sponsors?
Actually, Gopal Rao used to work for the Postal Service, and he had a reasonably important job within the British system, which is why he was getting transferred from Kolhapur to Bhuj to Birgaon, etc. So, I don't know what $20 in those days amounted to, but she traveled to America with at least $70 or $100 in her pocket. So, perhaps.
Okay, and then there's a comment from Rohini. She says, I would like to comment on Shika's question. One can see something similar in the thoughts of Ramabai Ranade and Savitribai Phule. Okay, I think we're out of time. So let's thank Ram for an excellent and thought-provoking talk. And over to you, Vandana.
Anyway, thank you very much, Shobna. Thank you, Vandana. Thanks all.
Thank you very much for this, taking this, accepting our invitation and giving this talk. And I also want to thank Shobna for coordinating this lecture and keeping up very well with time. And now we move on to the second part of the today's program, which is panel discussion. And I invite Professor Nilima Gupte to initiate the panel discussion. Nilima? Nilima, please unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So I just want to spend 2 minutes. See, remember we are short of time. So I just want to spend 2 minutes telling you what the idea of this discussion is. Okay. So I don't know how many of you are aware that in fact, we hear of women in physics all the time today. There was a time at which nobody had heard of any such thing. It was like I was discussing with Professor Radha Balakrishnan, while every one of us had our own headaches, it was a case of each person for themselves. Okay. To a certain extent, the organized activity in this whole thing started when some of us, at least three of whom I know are present over here, went for this Women in Physics conference, which was held in Paris in 2002. And Rohini was there, I was there, Sumati was there, Jyoti Gyan Chandani was there, Sunita Nair was there. I know three of us are here. I hope there are, I wish the other two were there too. Maybe they are. If they are, say hello. Okay. And I think it was an eye opener to all of us. At least it was an eye opener to me, because a lot of things which had happened to each one of us individually, we had no systematic notion of what it really was. We thought they were our own personal headaches. And it was after this that we started some kind of organized activity, which has continued now for a good, what is it, 18 years. And I think there are many ways in which the situation has changed. There are many ways in which things have progressed. There are many initiatives which have been undertaken, but many more remain. So I thought this was a good time to take stock of how things have changed and how much more they should change, which I think is fairly similar to Radha's title. Okay? And to this end, I would like to invite Dr. Prajwal Shastri, who's actually the head of the Women in Physics group of the Indian Physics Association. And she did a lot of things in the last few years, which including activity like bringing out special women's issues, organizing a gender conference, etc. And what I would like, and an important thing which she did was, so what I would like to request her to do is to summarize the activity during her stint in the Women in Physics group. Of course, there were many people before that who were quite active and did a lot of things, but she's the most recent one. Plus, at this gender conference, I think a series of initiatives was proposed. So it would be nice, Prajwal, if you could tell us about those initiatives. Just 1 minute. Everyone on this panel is not just a woman, she's a woman in physics, and Prajwal is a radio astronomer. Her thesis was on the Uti radio telescope, so she has a unique experience, which maybe she will say something about it in her talk. I don't know what she intends to say. Please, Prajwal. Yeah, I think you can start, Prajwal.
Can you hear me? Shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so as Nilima said, I'm mostly here to present things as chair of the Gender in Physics Working Group. So a correction is that it is the Gender in Physics Working Group, and we started this with the idea of foregrounding the idea of gender, and so it's more than just about women physicists. This was meant to be a national forum and also a conduit for the international interactions, especially related to the conferences that Nilima already mentioned, the International Conferences of Women in Physics. So I would like to take an extra minute and remember Professor Hema Ramachandran. She tragically left us very recently. This is an excerpt from the very first India Country Review at the very first International Conference of Women in Physics. There she says, I want to set up a science museum to show the common man that science is fun and that science can be easy. So this is really, really important. It is related to the question of gender inequity and other inequities, although I may not get into it in the time that I have. So the Gender and Physics Working Group, we articulated our mission like this, that it is a situation wherein gender will become irrelevant in physics practice in India, so that the need for a Gender and Physics Working Group will cease to exist. So this is how we articulated our mission statement. I hope you can see my presentation.
No, but you
No,
have to
we have
share
not
the
yet
screen.
shared the screen.
Share it, I guess.
Oh gosh, okay.
We should be able to share.
Okay, let me try again. I don't know why you're not able to see it.
Is it not allowing you to share? Okay, now it's working.
It's working now?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to then show those just one or two slides again. This was the slide I had on Hema Ramchandran, and this is the excerpt from the poster at the IPA 2002, which Neelima mentioned, where she had this to say, and was quoted in the poster. And this is how we articulated our vision. I don't know how much you heard, but when the working group was launched, we said that the ultimate goal is a situation wherein gender will become irrelevant in physics practice in India, so that the need for a gender and physics working group will cease to exist. I won't dwell on data that we have already published in the various equipped documents and elsewhere, that there is no evidence for lack of interest in science among girls. There is no evidence for a productivity deficit. This was actually studied in 2001 itself by Kumar, and most physicists were quite ignorant of this study. There's also no competence deficit, and the fraction of the pool of women physicists, which is the PhDs who are employed in higher education, is not reflected in honor positions, either in the academy, the C.V. Raman lectures of the IPA, or in governing councils. These data have been published already. But it's not always about prestige. Whenever the process is not an open call, but through invitations, we see this bias. So clearly there is a bias within the profession. This is the distribution for authors in the magazine Resonance. And again, until 2016, one can see that the gender fraction is really skewed. And so as the working group was formed, we came out with this idea of publishing 3 special editions of science publications with an all-women authorship. And these are, again, I won't dwell on these because they've been talked about in many places. But the whole idea was that the editors would take heed. And this 2017 is the distribution for Resonance after our special issue. And as you can see, the editors did not take heed. In 2018, it was similar, except that when there were editors who were unbiased, you can see that the gender fraction is much more even. But there have been palpable impacts, I have to say. The IPA Executive Council got a woman member as soon as the proposal was presented, none other than Vandana Nanal, who is here today. And if we look at the physics news author gender fractions, there is a palpable change, not in 2018, but starting 2019, it's inching along clearly towards some progress. The C.V. Raman lectures of the IPA, the fraction has rocketed post 2017. The Birla Memorial Awards, I can't say rocketed, there were none until 2017, and last year we had none other than Rohini Godbole, but it's promising nevertheless. Our kickoff event was also a step forward because many important topics were openly discussed, including sexual harassment. And then we had the national conference, which Neelima referred to, which by all counts was quite a success because we had at least 30% male participation, at least 50% younger generation participation, and it was a first of its kind interdisciplinary conference, which is really we see as key to this whole thing. Here are the organizers from Hyderabad who were the pillars of the conference. And a very important panel discussion happened at the conference, which was again key to our coming up with the recommendations. So the Hyderabad Charter for Gender Equity in Physics emerged from all our earlier work and from the discussions in the conference. One thing to be mindful of here is that there is a sense, I want to quote Londa Shibinger here, that there is a sense that nature takes its course, that given time, things right themselves. The history of women in science, however, has not been characterized by a march of progress, but by cycles of advancement and retrenchment. And this is something of a global historical conclusion, but for example, even here, I'm quoting this from Gupte et al., the country review presented in the EQUIP conference, where they say it is interesting that a survey of all working scientists in the country reveals that unlike in the West, there is very little perception at either school or college level that women cannot do physics and math. But the more recent data show the contrary. So there is this paper published in Current Science in 2018, and they show that there is a perception among boys that is growing that fewer girls than boys are interested in higher studies in science and maths, and etc., etc. I won't dwell on this. This is a published result, but it is definitely worrying, and it is a reflection of what Shibinger has said in the past. So coming to the Hyderabad Charter, the pillars are the fundamental principles which hardly anyone, certainly anyone at this meeting would disagree with. That is, people of all genders have equal potential to excel in all aspects of physics practice, and utilizing the talents of all is essential for the physics enterprise to achieve its full potential. So the whole core idea is that we get away from the idea of fixing the women and look at transforming the climate instead. So there are many manifestations of bias. The list is really, really long, and I don't want to go into all of them. But unfortunately, women, for instance, are still asked about their life circumstances during hiring. Women are still told that they have to learn how to balance. This is women right from their 20s when they come in as research interns to older professionals. Interventions still reinforce patriarchal ideas. By the way, there's some confusion about what patriarchy is. Patriarchy is a notion, it's a mindset. It is not something that is only perpetrated by fathers or husbands or brothers or that sort of thing. We are all raised to be sexist, and so we are all complicit in reinforcing patriarchy and therefore need to be mindful of it. Employment of a spouse continues to become a disqualification for a woman applicant to faculty positions, and of course sexual harassment is a can of worms in itself. So there are many guiding principles listed in the charter and then specific recommendations. I will just highlight a couple. So, for example, addressing gender bias does require insights from the social sciences. Interventions should not endorse societal patriarchy. Interventions must adapt to the evidence. And when a process of selection reduces the gender fraction from that in the pool, it is a signature of a biased process. Institutions must assume responsibility. So commitment of institutional leaders is key to make progress. So these are another couple of highlights. So a sociology, these are specific recommendations. and I'm just highlighting a couple. So, a sociology course on social processes and science practice should be part of the graduate physics curriculum. Diversity officers should be appointed as observers on editorial boards, nomination committees, and funding agency committees. And self declaration of sexual misconduct indictments should be mandatory for all positions of administrative responsibility and leadership, including academy fellows, editorial board memberships, and project funding committee memberships. So, this business about diversity officer creates quite a bit of confusion because it's apparently a new idea in academics. I didn't think so, but apparently it is. So, why diversity officers rather than women on committees? Well, first of all, both men and women are complicit in the bias that we experience. So, just having a woman on a committee doesn't necessarily mean that the bias will be eliminated. But more importantly, in physics in particular, the fraction is so low, the fraction of women is so low that women get overburdened having to serve on this and that and so many other committees. It impacts their research. They don't get acknowledgement for it, and so on. Whereas a diversity officer, as an observer, would be a person who's experienced in diversity matters, not necessarily a domain expert, but experienced in diversity, and they would sit in as observers and stop people from indulging in biased processes and make sure that there is transparency and accountability in the process. What is it? I'll just take a minute more to explain what it means to endorse this charter. So it means that we broadly believe in the text of the charter. It doesn't mean that each endorser believes in every word that is in the charter, but we broadly believe in the text of the charter, and we as individuals voluntarily pledge to work towards implementation of the charter in our own spheres of influence. So examples of spheres of influence are, for example, being on an SOC member of a conference where you would not accept anything less than 30% representation or gender diversity in all the aspects of the conference, including participants, invited speakers, chairs of sessions, and so on. You might be on a faculty hiring committee member, you might be an LOC member of conference, you might be an editorial board member, or even in the classroom. So these are all examples of our spheres of influence, and so when we endorse the charter, it means that we would strive to ensure a different climate, a more nurturing climate in our profession. So we so far have over 310 endorsements by physics PhDs who are in India, and that includes many institutional leaders, so that is promising. And we are continuing to seek endorsements and work with physicists to help them if they need improve the climate in their own local spheres of influence. People don't necessarily need help. The document is meant to serve as a starting document for discussion and dialogue, and it is expected that specific recommendations will also emerge from each locale. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Prajwal, for the introducing to the Hyderabad Charter, and I hope some of the things which you have shown the results will improve. The ratios will improve in the many things of the as a result of initiative which you have taken. We now will move on to the next panelist, Professor Radha Balkrishnan. I have request to all the panelists that please stay within about 8 minutes because that will leave us some time for discussion. Otherwise, we are already a little late. So it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Radha Balkrishnan, who is an internationally recognized researcher in the field of nonlinear dynamics and its application to physical systems. She got her PhD in USA in 1970 and later worked as a faculty at IMSc till 2004 and has remained active in research thereafter. She's been a Fulbright awardee and a senior associate at ICTP Trieste. I would not go into further details of her work and without for the want of time, and I would now request her to tell us about life in physics, what has changed, what should change. Over to you, Radha.
So we'll come back to Professor Radha Balakrishnan in as soon as we finish with Professor Sunil Mukhi. So Professor Sunil Mukhi, he is now in ISA. Is now in ISA Pune. He was earlier in TIFR Bombay. He's a very well-known string theorist, and he's here. I invited him here for two reasons. One is that he's a string theorist, so it's a hard theoretical area in which there aren't all that many women. On the other hand, he has also worked with a lot of young people. He has worked in he has worked with a lot of young people, so he would know a lot about mentoring people. He has been in important administrative positions where, in fact, in many mentoring tasks, the help of the admin is very heavily required apart from the contribution of individuals. And the other thing is that he's the only man on the committee. And the reason why we asked him was because menfolk know a lot about mentoring. They've, after all, been mentoring for centuries. So maybe he can share some ideas with us. Thank you, Sunil. Please carry on.
Okay, thanks, Nilima. I will briefly share. I will quickly share my screen, and now I hope you can actually see it. I've also full screened it. Is this good?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just say a few words. Let me say that the topic suggested to me was mentorship initiatives, and I noticed that the next speaker, actually after Radha, is Nishita Desai, who is going to talk about perspectives of a young woman physicist. And it seems to me she is the person who is in the right place. I mean, I'm neither young nor a woman, so this is not from direct experience. This is what I have to say from observation. Let me just say, first of all, that mentoring is generally understood to be a relationship in which a more experienced and knowledgeable person helps guide a less experienced or knowledgeable person. There's a paper by two women at, I forgot the institute, Legrum and Haas, on mentoring specifically of women scientists or women academics, and they have written what Nilima said 2 minutes ago. For men, mentoring is already in place as the old boys network. So men instinctively mentor other men as soon as these younger people join academic institutions. And these authors also had the following interesting thing to say from studies. Young female scientists are not given the same kind of support and advice as their male colleagues, and are also less well integrated into networks, even if they do have the same access to scientific institutions. So it means that we try to make sure that women have a more and more equal chance to get a position. That still doesn't guarantee them the kind of support that their male colleagues get. So it's not a level playing field. Now, what does mentorship achieve in general? Not only for women, but just in general? Well, there are studies. It boosts self-confidence, self-assertion, and independence. In particular, there are studies showing that academics who are mentored, either male or female, are more likely to apply for a promotion or more likely to ask for something that they expect. To believe that they deserve something. Mentoring helps younger scientists plan their academic activities better, think about what's good for them intellectually, what is good for them administratively. It helps warn young people of impending dangers or complications or injustices built into a system. Often young people reach a stage where they are expecting something nice to happen, like a promotion or something, but they weren't told that X, Y, and Z would be factors in that, and they realize it at the last moment. And women in particular, because of less mentoring, risk showing up at that stage without knowing what they should expect. More subtly, mentoring creates an enabling atmosphere. Now, a few observations that are more specific to women academics, and these I can say are mostly from my observation of things around. First of all, mentoring for women academics would help them project research achievements in a confident way. This is very important. And my experience of women academics is that all too often, particularly younger women, have been much better in actual work, research, than they are willing to say in public. There's a certain sense of not wanting to overproject. A few men suffer from it. I would say that more women tend to suffer from it because of the way they tend to be socialized at a younger age. and mentoring can help them say clearly what they actually are worth. It encourages women in the same spirit to feel comfortable asserting their equal rights, for example, to funding and institutional support. It can happen that women are overlooked or underrated when it comes to these things, and mentoring can help them feel comfortable to assert themselves. It helps women to navigate between two options that can end up taking a very bad emotional toll. So what I've seen is that when women face discrimination, as they often do, stated or unstated, mostly unstated these days, they feel that the two options are take it quietly or speak up. But when you speak up, then you're risking labels like hysterical woman, argumentative woman. I think this was on the cartoon that Prajwal showed at the end of her talk. And so, often women scientists are confused about which one to do. Are they going to risk the unhappiness of taking the discrimination, or are they going to risk these labels? And mentoring can help them somehow navigate in a way where this labeling cannot happen and the discrimination also cannot happen. One thing I've noticed in ICER is that students often respond differently to male and female teachers. And this is not only male students, sometimes also female students. It's surprising, but it's a complex business, I think. But female teachers come up before a class, as in ICER, of 200 students, and often don't know how brutal it can be, especially if they are new. This is their first course, and they are visibly nervous. Men are also new. They also have to teach first courses. They also look nervous, but the class responds somehow differently. These are various aspects in which I think mentoring can actually help women academics. So I'll conclude with a few thoughts about what institutions should do. But, I'm not really it really should be women with the right, who are experiencing these kind of issues, who should be determining the agenda for what institutes should do. First of all, there has been a suggestion floating around in ICER to formalize a mentorship group or a committee for women faculty, and I think that's going to happen. This isn't there yet in any place, I know, in India at least, but an institutional audit where, at the end of each year, we ask how many women did we hire, how many did we promote, how many gave colloquia, seminars, how many were in committees, are there women who are deans, chairs of departments, etc. And then, just a gentle push or, suggestion for improvement can actually improve the atmosphere a little bit. Sensitizing faculty and admin to subconscious and conscious forms of discrimination is important. Many women I know report that admin, and again, it's admin, could be men in admin, it could be women in admin, treat the women faculty quite differently from the male faculty when it comes to handling their grants or any other thing that admin has to handle. So these are some things I think that institutes can do. And I'll conclude with this quote, which I think it really strikes me. I read it in an article that fighting diversity battles on top of your research, this is exhausting because you're competing with men who don't have to fight this battle. And so it's an extra thing. Research is hard enough. So I think we must, make sure that via mentorship, this kind of exhausting, wasted time is saved and women are able to participate properly in the workplace. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. We'll take exactly 2 questions if there are any, because just in case.
They might be from YouTube. I don't know if there are questions from the YouTube side.
If I may ask a question to Sunil. Right. Yeah, so I have a general question about, so you really very perceptively said that young women do not get enough mentoring. In my experience, if young women ask for advice, they are given a very general advice rather than a specific one, and in a very patronizing tone.
Yeah, because their brains can't comprehend the details.
No, not necessarily. I think it also comes from a fear of being misunderstood and fear of being too frank.
I see.
So yeah, so I was just wondering if you had any advice for older men faculty on how to deal with this thing, rather than, for young women.
I don't know about Frank. I mean, if somebody asks a question, there's a precise, we are all scientists here. If somebody would ask me a question, I would try to give a precise answer, be it a woman or a man asking the question. Why does anybody not do that? I haven't quite understood that psychology. I generally thought it was this mansplaining business that you feel, the starting point of what the woman is understanding is so low that you need to start by explaining what is ABC 1, 2, 3. That I've seen in action. But more generally, whether, what you mean by general answers, I didn't completely get. But, if you
Yeah,
get
so if
something through
I can
general
give a
ask,
more precise example. So, for
uh-huh.
example, if a young woman asks, what are you looking for in a prospective faculty member?
Hmm.
The general question, the general answer would be something like, oh, you have to have a lot of papers, you have to have
Hmm.
this and that. So, this is something that everybody knows.
Hmm.
And this is not the answer that young men get when they ask this question.
It might be the answer young men get. Just to be fair here, I mean, institutions try to be as vague as they can because they don't want to be pinpointed on such things. It might be, it might not be, I agree. I just think it might be the same answer too. Maybe I'm
Sunil Prajwal.
maybe I'm
Yeah.
being defensive because I answer this question a lot, but I frankly try to, answer it as generally as I can. Okay. Prajwal has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sunil. You mentioned problems with mentoring, which to me suggests that the solution lies in educating the mentors, not the mentees. And I think the responsibility to do that shouldn't be on the mentees. The mentors, whether men or women, do need to get sensitized on a variety of dimensions. And this thing you mentioned about how the cartoon I showed reflects reality. Now that is a situation where the senior scientists need to be educated that this is not right behavior. I mean, it is not right behavior to treat somebody as hysterical or whatever that, all those things that you described. We need to have the senior scientists train themselves to not do that, right?
Absolutely. No, maybe I didn't say this clearly enough, but everything in my talk was aimed at mentors rather than mentees. I mean, there isn't anything that a young woman should be obliged to do differently from what a young man is obliged to do in the same job. So, it's not her job to be understood better or to be treated equally. It's somebody else's job to treat them equally. Absolutely true. I completely agree with that point. And I should just say quickly that there was an attempt to have a mentoring meeting for faculty in ICER some years ago. The problem, which you can almost guess, is that on gender issues, on gender sensitivity, the only ones who showed up for the meeting were the ones who are already gender sensitive, like 8 or 10 people, and another 100 plus just didn't show up. So, what do you do short of ordering people? So Rohini has a
Well,
question.
I would say what we need to do is have a policy where if there is a internship program or there are young people or whatever, the people who will be their mentors must mandatorily undergo such training, whether they're men or women. I mean, they must I think that should be a policy.
Can we take one question comment from YouTube to Sunil particularly? So there's a question from Shilpa Sharma. Says why the men are not comfortable to the fact that gender inequality at this level is not acceptable. Women are always comfortable, but in my opinion, men are not.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's a more general phenomenon. Anybody who is discriminated against is aware of it. Anybody who is discriminating against others is not typically aware of it or doesn't want to see it or doesn't sense it because it's not happening to them. I mean, it's like discrimination against religious groups or any other group in that sense. I mean, problems of women are unique in many ways, but the problem of discrimination is like that. People who discriminate will always tell you that they don't see the problem. By the way, I've been in many meetings, even in TIFR, where women gave a bunch of things that were bothering them and that were real women faculty. And then a man puts up his hand and says, but I've been here a long time and I don't see any problem. I thought that's really
Tell
hilarious.
me about it. Yeah, yeah.
It's very normal. It's very normal. I mean, very common, how to say.
So there is another just question by Nandita Jairaj. Any comments on the recent controversial nature communication study where researchers claim to find that female mentors are less effective?
I don't know, less effective than what? I mean, I can always find some male mentors who are less, I mean, I don't know what this study is, so I don't want to comment.
All right.
I don't see any reason why any mentor should be less effective if they are interested and they understand the situation. Female mentors might understand the situation. Depending on the person, they may or may not be interested to be good mentors. That you can't do something about institutionally so easily.
Sunil, Shubha Tore has a comment on, just ask her. Yeah. Shubha, please come on. Yeah.
Excellent points, Sunil, especially what you said about institutional audits and agencies that give awards or recognitions. If they don't do an audit, they're never going to progress in this direction. So right now, I chair the Women in Science panel of the Indian Academy of Sciences, one that Sandhya Vishwesharaya and before her Rohini Godbole chaired. And, we have collectively tried to make things happen. So we identified this last year, the Rajiv Goyal Prize, the Goyal and the Rajiv Goyal Prize, in which there were very, very few women ever, recognized. And we actively shortlisted women in all the disciplines. We wrote to them, then we found subject-specific, experts to nominate them. And uniformly, what we got from the women we contacted was, oh my God, really? I never thought I would be eligible. I mean, just uniformly, eminent, highly qualified women. So this whole mentorship thing is a big lacuna. So thank you for pointing it out.
Thanks. Rohini has a comment. Of course, I'm happy to let the discussion move on to the next, but maybe Rohini can quickly make a comment.
It depends whether there is time. What I wanted to say is that me correctly, all of you are talking about mentorship, where mentorship takes into account that confident behavior on the part of a woman should not be tagged as arrogant. But I am actually saying that there is yet another point which I see very often is mentors, and this is the male mentors, frankly, quite often mentors who decide for themselves what is good for the mentee.
Yeah.
For their life, for your life together, I suggest you do. Take a, soft position. And the number of times I've heard this, and I think this is where male mentors need to be educated.
This is condescending mentorship, which is a real problem, and it can be worse than no mentorship, because it can actually degrade the woman's perception of what she's capable of more than whatever it already was.
Exactly. That's exactly what I wanted to say.
Very worrying problem. I agree with you.
Yeah.
So thank you, Sunil. I'm sure people have lots more questions, but we should really go back to Radha. And maybe people can just type things so that we'll take it up whenever we can. Okay? Yeah.
Yeah, we took Sunil questions for Sunil because he has some other time constraints. We'll have to take questions for others also that day. So Radha, you want to try again?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So
Okay.
I will just share the screen, okay, to keep it.
Okay. But yeah.
Just give me a second. I'll just do that. 1 minute. Yeah. Yes. So I think your thing should be visible now. Yeah. Yeah. So please go ahead.
Yes. You can hear me now, right?
Yes. Yes. Please go ahead.
I thank all of you for inviting me to be on this panel. And as I already said, I was brought up in Delhi and I got my BSc Honours and MSc at the University of Delhi. And my parents were really helpful to me, making a decision to go abroad for a PhD, because very few people went abroad in those days, because People usually got married after MSc. Now, I got an assistantship at the University of Rochester, passed my qualifying exams there, and got married to Bala, classmate from Delhi University, who was a graduate student at Brandeis University then. I transferred from Rochester to Brandeis, finished my PhD in 1970. My thesis was in theoretical condensed matter physics, but of course, Bala's was in high energy physics. My thesis advisor, Professor Robert Lang, gave me constant encouragement, and he let me try out all my ideas and was always ready for discussion. He was also ready to arrange a postdoctoral position in the US, but we had decided to return to India. But no, the previous one, please.
Sorry.
His words to me were, as a woman physicist, you will have to produce twice as much work as a man to get half the recognition. The prejudice and chauvinism of male physicists towards women physicists is appalling. Now, that was something that I had to remind myself quite often. In the 1970s, there were very few jobs in theoretical physics. I encountered formidable difficulties in getting a job commensurate with my qualifications without breaking up my family. But I remained active in research, publishing papers, working from home. I will not go into the painful details here, but will mention one dilemma in which I found myself. In 1974, Bala got a permanent job in a DE research center located in a rather isolated place with the understanding that I would also get placed there soon. That did not materialize because anti-nepotism rules were brought up. I asked if I could work with a CSIR or a UGC-RA, but I was informed that I could not work there with external funding. When I asked about a DAE fellowship, I was told that these could only be held outside DAE institutions, and there were none nearby. Nor could I be given just a desk space without a salary so that I could use the library regularly, owing to security reasons. I was totally stymied and stuck by this catch-22 situation. Next, please. Next slide.
Yeah.
Publishing papers from home was difficult without today's internet facilities. Eventually, Bala joined IIT Madras and I got a CSR RA and then a UGC RA, which I held from 1982 to 1987 at the Theoretical Physics Department of University of Madras. By that time, I had switched my area of research from condensed matter to nonlinear dynamics. Besides research, I also taught MSc courses during that period. Finally, in 1987, I got a permanent position at IMSc Chennai, 17 years after my PhD. Professor E.C.G. Sudarshan was the director then. By then, I had several single author papers as well as papers in collaboration with some IMSc faculty members. I had also given seminars at IMSc on my work on solitons, which had gained some recognition. Of course, the formal affiliation really helped me present my work everywhere and on nonlinearity. Over the years, I've had the chance to collaborate with people not only from India, but from people all over the world. Next, please. Okay. Now, here I have to go a little slow. Experiences of other women physicists in India. I thank Rohini and Ram for the excellent collection on the lives and careers of Indian women in science in India of these daughters. I am dismayed that women much younger than me, in some cases by decades, have had to face various gender-based issues. I have only selected the women physicists for what I'm going to say below. Firstly, archaic anti-nepotism rules that have forced women researchers to live apart from their husbands for many years, sometimes also bringing up children as single mothers, which has extreme difficulties. Two, the belittlement and adverse criticism of the contributions of women physicists, sometimes the non-experts who don't know what the field is about. Third, single author papers are sometimes dismissed as an inability to collaborate, and collaborative papers, especially with one's husband, are dismissed as inability to do independent research. The plight of experimentalists, of course, is just too much because they need lab and equipment and the sharing of equipment and students. The list is painfully long. All these and more have compelled many highly qualified women physicists to drop out, contributing to the notorious leaky channel. What has changed? There are many more new jobs for physicists now. With 23 IITs, 7 ICERs, Inspire faculty fellowships, several central, state, and privately funded universities with a mandate to engage in research. More jobs, so that will imply employment of more women physicists. Second, the DST Women Scientists Scene. This is a very good initiative for women as a career break. I know several women who have taken this up. A generally more rational and progressive attitude towards the solution of the two-body problem. The simultaneous employment of both spouses in the same institution or in the same city by informal coordination between two institutions. Increasing recognition. Aditi Sende has become the first woman to receive the Bhatnagar Award for Physical Sciences in 2019. Congratulations, Aditi. This will definitely inspire many talented girls. There are more creches and childcare facilities now, and their numbers are increasing. Most good ones are privately run, but affordable with the typical academic salary. Some progressive institutions have also started providing childcare facilities. The ubiquitous internet has become the great equalizer. Anybody with a connection can access information, learn, and get answers to the questions and doubts. This significantly empowers students, especially girls, because girls usually hesitate to ask questions because there is social conditioning. As you know, questions are what kindle original research. And awareness of women's scientists issues in India, starting with the Women in Science initiatives of the Indian Academy of Sciences, INSA report on the Leaky Channel, Niti Aayog report on the statistics of women joining PhD programs in the sciences, WIP section, this present one of IPA and so on. I want to say something about Niti Aayog. The statistics show that about more than 33% of women going to PhD are either in the health sciences or anything related to medicine. And after that comes those people who want to do either computer science or engineering. Physics doesn't figure anywhere, and this is something to be noticed. Okay, what should change? I have already listed the various issues faced by many women while establishing the career. This should be remedied. And I should mention that I had only selected the women from physics. If you take women from other disciplines, they have very similar problems and more. So some desirables are more girls from the science stream in schools should be encouraged to take up physics for a career and should be informed about the various job opportunities that exist, because most of them just want to go into software because they think that's where the jobs are. But now they should be told there are jobs in physics and they should take up this research career in physics. This usual cliche that a woman typically finishes her PhD and starts on a postdoctoral fellowship and tries to establish herself as an independent researcher between the ages of 25 and 35, and these coincide with her optimal childbearing years. So special efforts and initiatives are needed to ensure that her career does not terminate. And this is the well-known leaky channel at this stage. Thank you very much for your attention. That's it.
Thank you, Radha, very much for really nicely summing it up and giving a view, sort of bird's eye view of your entire journey. And it is really very, very inspiring. Even the different aspects, particularly what you brought about the joint positions, is something which, as Prajwal also highlighted, has been brought out in Hyderabad chapter because that problem still remains. We now move on, and now I would like to invite one of our younger colleagues. In fact, both our next speakers are young scientists, and they would give us the problems from today's perspective. So I'll invite Dr. Nishita Desai, who's presently a Ramanujan Fellow in Department of Theoretical Physics at TIFR. She did her PhD in HRI and has received many prestigious fellowships, including Marie Curie Actions, Early Stage Researcher at CERN, and Humboldt Fellowship. Her research is focused on particle physics with particular interest in searching for physics beyond standard model. She will tell about her experiences and her issues, but I should also say that she's quite extensively associated in mentoring the young women students. She was involved in TIFR's recent initiative, Vigyan Vidushi 2020. Over to you, Nishita.
Thank you, Vandana, for the too kind introduction. Yeah, so I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Right. So thank you very much again for the invitation. And most of the people on this panel have the experience of a lifetime behind them and are looking back through that lens. And I'm really grateful to have this chance to provide perspective from the other end of the tunnel, so to speak. So so instead of talking about these general problems with mindset and culture and problems which are easy to diagnose but probably very difficult to solve, my goal for this talk is to identify problems which hopefully will be slightly easier to solve. So Radha just mentioned the leaky pipeline, so that's great. So what this pipeline refers to is this issue as one progresses from one stage of your career to the next one, it seems that more and more women leave the field. And of course, the biggest bottleneck in this career pipeline is going from the postdoc stage to the faculty stage. This is a bottleneck for everybody, not just for women, but it seems to disproportionately affect women applicants. And so what I want to do in this talk is actually talk about some of the pressure points that are relevant for this transition. And I will talk in particular about two of these pressure points which relate to job applications and grants. And there are, of course, other points as well related to visibility and mentorship, which have been addressed a little bit in the talks that came before. Before I go ahead in this talk, let me actually summarize the conclusion that I found while writing this talk. So the main problem that exists right now in the system, so to speak, is a lack of timeliness, accountability, and transparency. And what was probably okay 30 years ago is now completely unacceptable because the market is extremely competitive. So it's a buyer's market. There are far more applicants than there are jobs. And therefore, when you have a gap in providing information, that's obviously going to really affect the applicants and their mental well-being, for example, and also their ability to cross this hurdle. So the ideas in this talk will hopefully benefit everybody and not just women. And in fact, I sent out an email to some colleagues and asked them to forward it just so that I could get some cross-section of experiences of people who are either applying for jobs or are young faculty members. And I've also talked about these issues with male colleagues, in fact, and almost all of them face these problems. So hopefully, if these problems are addressed, they'll be useful to everybody. So let me start my talk now. And the main topic is, of course, faculty applications. And the biggest problem here by far is that there is no time scale for decision. So you apply, and often it's more than a year from application to decision. And you can contrast this with what happens internationally, where you basically go from advertisement to offer within 3 or 4 months. So usually now, of course, because all faculty jobs in India, especially in IITs, ISRs, or research institutes, require postdoctoral experience, the only people who will be tolerating this kind of structure are people who really have to be in India for family reasons, or who are really uncompetitive and really have no other options. So this is really, I think, something to consider for the wider community, whether we can go on with something like this. And one of the reasons for this kind of time scale is also because we operate on this rolling advertisement kind of policy, which is you apply anytime, and then apparently the department moves forward if there is an interesting application. Now, again, I have not been on the other side of this divide. I've not been on a hiring panel, but this is something that I would like to ask to more senior investigators. What do you think this means? Because as previous speakers have said, that there is an unconscious bias underlying all such hirings. And if you have to post hoc define what is interesting and what is not, I mean, you first see the application and then decide whether it's interesting or not, whether such biases will seriously affect this process. The next thing that happens is, of course, that the review of applications is out of sync with both national and international calendar. It can happen any time of the year. There are no fixed interview dates, which is, of course, obvious given that there is no fixed cutoff date. And the interview policy is completely inconsistent. So one applicant might be interviewed via video. The next person would be told, no, you have to be here in person. And this might be particularly problematic if the person is doing a postdoctoral fellowship abroad, because of course, travel reimbursement for interviews is forbidden by law in India. Then a really big problem which really affects the sanity of applicants is that there is often no acknowledgement of the application. So you're not informed that your application has been received. You are not informed when the application will be processed. And when the search is done, you are not informed that the search is finished. Okay. Sometimes your application is rejected. The next round of applications comes in, somebody is hired, you have no idea what has happened. So most applications just really feel like you've sent them into a black hole. The side effect of this kind of black hole is that this lack of information is solved by informal networks. And therefore, if you have a strong informal network, you naturally stand to benefit. So if you have someone on the inside who can provide some inclinations or hints of what's going on, then of course you are going to benefit by it. And these networks are naturally formed because you belong to a certain undergraduate or graduate institute, or you speak a certain language, or you belong to a certain region. Also, as Sunil was saying, that this mentorship between genders is kind of even more tricky, because these kinds of information is not passed in formal chat. You cannot do this kind of chat in the office. It happens often over tea or just when you're sitting and chatting or taking a walk. And this really does not happen between genders that often. Even when there is talk, it is often less frank, and the bigger the age gap, the worse this informality is. I mean, I think that's quite obvious to most people. So just because you have to rely on these informal networks, so let me say again, there is nothing wrong with making friends who speak the same language or who come from the same institute as you do. Of course, we all do that. But if you have to rely only on these to get any information, then I think there's going to be a big mismatch in how far you can get. Okay. So here are some of my ideas of what would help. Again, like I said, I have not sat on the other side of the divide, but from my perspective, this is something that would help. So the first would be timeliness and accountability. So even though you have a rolling application, you can decide on a cutoff date, and you can also decide on some departmental priorities. So we are going to prefer hiring in fields so and so. So other people may of course also apply, but this is going to be our priority, and we will consider all applications received before this date. You can follow a sort of hiring calendar. So this is a calendar that is followed currently, at least in fields of high energy physics, all the way from Australia to China to Europe to America, which is you have cutoffs in November, you interview in January or February, and you give a decision by March. And this timetable I feel is suitable for a start of academic year, both in India and abroad. So if somebody does not get a job and has to have another postdoctoral fellowship, they can still do that. Then I would say just provide basic human communication. Email costs nothing. So please try and acknowledge applications, and please try and say that you've closed your search. So I think this would already seriously improve communication between candidates and people who hire. A second suggestion I have is about transparency. So this I feel is something that might be happening, which is that this definition of what an interesting applicant looks like. So I would say, if possible, don't define what an interesting applicant looks like beforehand. Have some minimum criteria and ask people for some kind of pre-interviews. You can do maybe video interviews, and give people the opportunity to change your minds. And finally, what I would say is, even if you don't implement this blind study kind of policy, would be to just publish the total number of applications that were reviewed in the current cycle and the short list of candidates called for interview. So this is something, in fact, that has again been remedied informally. So there are lots of rumor mills that are being checked obsessively by applicants and have known to really affect the mental health of applicants. So it would really help if these official, I mean, there's nothing really secret about the shortlist, right? I mean, we're not asking you to publish the list of everybody who applied, but I think the shortlist can certainly be made public. Okay, so that was the first part. The next part is about the dual career policy. Again, this was touched on by Radha quite in detail. So there's often an unspoken rule against hiring spouses. And I was trying to find some statistics about how this affects men and women. And the only statistics, unfortunately, that I found were from America. But probably, at least going by my experience and by network, this is probably true that far more women are married to male scientists than the other way around. The second thing
sorry
that
to
affects.
interrupt.
Sorry?
Can you wrap up in a minute or a minute and a half?
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. So the second thing that affects, I feel, is our age limits. So often opening positions are at entry level. And if you have an age limit, then it's impossible to be flexible once you reach a certain age. There are several fellowship schemes out there, which presumably should help. But again, you cannot overcome age restrictions if you have them. And secondly, people who get these fellowships often cannot really attain competency because they are not seen as equals in departments. So they don't have access to funding or students and so on. And so even though you have this fellowship, it does not necessarily mean that you can reach the same level of career progression. So what would help here? So the main request I would have would be to judge competence by research productivity than by age. I think that would already help a lot. And of course, hiring policy should be made clear and on paper. So I'll go then to the grants, which is another important thing that affects young faculty members in particular. So I talked about all these kind of fellowships that are open. However, again, often there is no decision date for application. And even if you get this kind of fellowship or grant, the money doesn't arrive on time. So there is often months without salary. And sometimes I know personally people who have gone years without salary. So this, as you can imagine, can cause extreme stress and loss of productivity. And even though these kinds of fellowships come with special research grant money, this cannot be utilized because there's a certain amount that has to be utilized per year. And of course, these kinds of stories are sort of treated as funny stories by people who are still in the field, and no one remembers people who have actually failed because of these problems. Okay, so again, I would say this to more senior people, that if the goals of these fellowship is to stop and reverse brain drain, then the minimum requirement would be a basic accountability regarding time scale and salary. Okay. Then another problem that I heard from people is that they are often able to get foreign grants, but not grants in India. And there is absolutely no feedback about why they did not get a particular grant. So I would suggest in this case to have this Europe-style feedback mechanism, where you have just some bullet points from each reviewer saying what is good about the application and what is bad, and actual scoring. So if you provide this kind of feedback to applicants, as well as publish the scores online, then you already have some transparency and some feedback to participants about how they can improve their application. So yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you. And since I am a scientist, there are some systematic uncertainties with the conclusions that I derived. So I just list them here. I won't talk about them, but thank you.
All right. So let me then invite our next panelist, Bulumoni Kalita. Bulumoni is another young colleague of ours. So she is from Dibrugarh University. She actually did her postdoc with Shobna, and she's working on density function theory calculation of nanomaterials. So I request Bulumoni to tell us about balancing the personal and academic life and young women scientist perspective. Over to you, Bulumoni.
Yeah, good evening to all. So it's really a privilege for me to be here in this discussion, because I'm hearing all of you who have all the expertise in different areas. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers as well as the coordinators especially Professor Shobhana Madam and Professor Vandana Madam for giving me this opportunity to be here. So I will be very brief because I will be telling everything from my own experience. So as you have already told that I am from a very small place in Assam. So I was born and brought up in a place named Bokakhat, which is near Kaziranga. You might have heard about this place in Assam. So, in one sentence, if I have to say, it is practically very challenging, especially for a common woman to balance her academic and personal life. However, I believe that the ability to do so comes from whatever we have already faced in our life. So there are so many factors that have already been highlighted by the previous speakers for gender inequity in academics, specifically for science subjects like physics. But I believe that apart from these factors, actually there are some basic problems to basically balance the academic life, means to continue it successfully in parallel with the personal life. Here I support the idea put forwarded by Professor Mukhi sir that proper mentoring may be helpful in this regard. So I am not sure about basically the technical issues involved in the proper mentoring case, but I believe that it may be someone in our life who may become a mentor. So personally, I am lucky to meet one such person in my life, who is none other than Professor Shobhana Narasimhan, with whom actually I worked for a small period as a postdoctoral fellow. I also agree with the point raised by Professor Radha Balakrishnan Madam that the period when a woman can establish herself as an independent research career overlaps with her personal life, like getting married and having family, etc. So let me quickly cite my means the trajectory of my own life. So as I said, I am from a very small family. Means it's a common family from a very small place. So basically, I had no strong motivation at that time what I will do in future. But here, for the first time, I take the opportunity to acknowledge the sacrifices made by my mother. This is because who has not even attended college, but she took the initiative to send me to the best college in Assam at that time, Cotton College, which has now become a university. This is because at that time it was a very poor financial condition of our family, so we could not even think of going to a college and stay in hostel. So anyway, I gained some motivation after coming to this college when I met many good professors and many good friends over there. After that, also I met many influential professors during my university days at Guwahati University, which is another prestigious institution in Assam. So after that, actually, as I said, my aims were not firm. So means randomly means I got motivated. I was interested to study, continue my research as well. But I was looking for some opportunities, and means surprisingly and coincidentally, I got selected for a research PhD position in Tezpur Central University, Assam. So I worked for my PhD there in the chemical sciences department. My mentor was Professor Ramesh Chandra Deka. So we worked in the DFT modeling of nanomaterials, but somehow I was in love with my research work there. So I put lot of effort. By that time, I also got married. In spite of having very limited facilities in terms of infrastructure over there at that time, we were successful in publishing some of our works in reputed journals. I also feel proud to share with you that the first JAX paper actually from the Northeast region came from our laboratory only. So I got motivated after that. I was very much satisfied, and I got the help and support from my husband as well, because he got transferred to that place at that time, because he is in a transferable central government job. But at the same time, as you were discussing, I had faced many mental harassments during that time. I'm sorry, means I am not in a position to elaborate those situations, but means I can say that I strongly handled all of them till the submission of my thesis. And surprisingly, the situations were basically created by many learned women. I am sorry, means for this, because I think that rather than expecting a help from a man, or expecting them to understand us, we the women should help each other, uh, as we do as a mother for our daughter, right? So this is my personal feeling. Means I may be wrong, but this is from my own experience. But anyway, my husband was there as a moral support all the time. So means before, just before getting my PhD viva, I got my child. So then my real struggle actually began. I actually got some postdoctoral offers from abroad, but I had to deny those because my daughter was only 3 months old. So somehow I could manage to get the DST Nano postdoctoral fellowship at that time and joined Professor Shobhana Narasimhan in JNCSR. It was a learning experience there. I learned how to remain strong and manage different things in life. Many times I was confused whether I should stop there or choose some temporary positions, as my husband has a transferable job. So basically, I was confused. But basically, it was my love for academics, my mother's constant reminders regarding my goal. Means she was insisting me what you are doing. Do not forget your goal. My husband's full support made me realize that I should not give up. And ultimately, I joined Dibrugarh University as an assistant professor in the year 2013. So initially, I had very tough time, as I had to manage alone my daughter, who was only 2.5 years old at that time, and my teaching job. I could not even think for research at that time. And moreover, the infrastructure here was not up to the mark. I work in a state university, and that time, before 8 years, the condition was even means poorer. So again, I had to keep patience after the personal things were coming in a line. After maybe 3-4 years, I wrote a project and got the UGC startup grant of rupees 6 lakhs or so. With that, I could buy a small workstation and a commercial program package that is required for my calculations. So at that time, I did not have any research scholar, and there was a rule in our university that after completion of the probation period of 1 year and having at least one publication as a single authorship or so after PhD, only we can have research scholars. So I could work very hard as my husband got transferred, luckily at that time, from Bangalore to one nearby place here. So ultimately, out of my hard work, I got my first solo publication in 2016 in Journal of Physical Chemistry A. So I consider this is a great achievement for me because I know what I have faced. So after that, actually, I started my research group. I believe that I have never taken any excuse of being a woman in my personal or professional life. Even then, it is very unfortunate that I had faced some unwanted situations, even during my service here in Dibrugarh University, which also created mental pressure for me from time to time. But now I can happily declare that my decisions were correct. I appreciate my own strength and support from my family, especially my husband. I have observed that many bright female students, science students in our region, even after having PhD or postdoc experiences, have either given up their career or have compromised with their situations, and they are doing some jobs, means maybe without having their satisfactions. So I think it is a great loss for all of us. We should not consider our research just as to get a degree or publishing some papers. But maybe sometimes I had also somehow compromised because of my family restrictions after getting my child. But if we keep patience and can make ourselves ready to handle the personal and family life, I think it is possible to balance. One important factor here is also that to take care of one's physical and mental health. So I give importance to both of these. So at the end, I would say that I don't know how much I am successful in managing both the aspects of my life, but I love my family, my profession, and myself equally. I am not in a race to achieve something. I will carry on my duties, and that is why I am satisfied. Once my father told, for being happy, one has to get satisfied. I also consider that I have a social responsibility too. Therefore, I try my best to do justice with my teaching and research. Most of my students and research scholars are basically from this region, and I understand that they may also have some problems as I had. So I try to render my service to them in the best possible way. So means after just citing some of my experiences as a researcher as well as an academician, although not from a very reputed institution, I still feel happy because I have a dream to achieve something along with my young researchers who are from this region to show that we can also do something. So now I look for your suggestions. Thank you. If you can hear me.
Yeah, thank you, Bulamani, for really very inspiring. I'm sure many young students will find this inspiring to them, and it's nicely that I liked you the way you put that, put everything very nicely and lucidly. I request now Nilima to invite Professor Pratibha Jolly, the next panelist.
Yes, so I'd like to invite Dr. Pratibha Jolly to address us on the topic of Gati, which is a new initiative of the DST. Just 2 words about Pratibha to start with. Pratibha did her PhD in particle physics from Delhi University. For a long time, she worked in Delhi University, and then she became principal of Miranda College, where she was responsible for many, many forward-thinking initiatives. She has been a very prominent as a physics teacher. She had some very nice experiments which were set up for undergraduate students. This was a whole project by itself. Additionally, she has been president of IPT. She has been a member of the IPA50 panel on women. She has been a member of the IPA50 panel of physics teachers. And we are very happy to have her here because this is a new initiative and we hope she will tell us about it.
Thank you very much, Nilima. And thanks for having me here. It really takes me back also to the lovely time Shovna, yourself, Sumati, and I had at Rio. And that was, I think, 2005 EQUIP, and then again in 2008. So I think those conferences have helped a great deal in also giving a bird's eye view on what is happening across the world. Yes, last year I was very happy to be at Hyderabad. Before I take things forward, may I start sharing my screen?
Yeah.
Oops. Give me a minute. Do you have me?
Yeah.
Okay, so as you said, Gati, Gender Advancement for Transforming Institutions, is a new initiative launched by DST. In fact, we just went public on 19th of November. And this has been a long time in making. It was in summer of 2019 that DST approached and suggested that one should conceptualize it. And after that, we did have a couple of meetings in summer of 2019. And Gati was conceptualized, it was ready. But then, as with all government schemes, it took a backseat, nothing was happening. I was committed that I would devote myself to it. And then in March, it actually things started moving. And soon after, I think a day after things moved, there was the lockdown. So it's essentially in September that, I heard again from the ST and this project was sanctioned. And what does it do? And I'm not sure what the participant profile is. So I hope I will not be really talking to those who are already very much aware of the Athena Swan, or or also have been working on many other initiatives that have to do with institutional transformation. But it's important that I take you through very quickly Athena Swan, because Vandana many times wrote that I was going to be speaking on Athena Swan. So deeply embedded in our psyche is Athena Swan. And that is kind of interesting because apart from a certain subsection, generally people do not know what Athena Swan is. So this is a progressive program that has been there for more than a decade, since 2005 really in the current form, and then again it's transformed this year, launched by Advance HE in UK. And it's based on explicit recognition that there is rampant gender bias. And it began with the STEM disciplines. So Prajwal did flag many of these issues, but I'm going to very quickly go through them. Certainly, institutions and academia cannot progress unless it benefits from talents of all. There is a great deal of resistance to understanding some of these, or admitting that there is a lot of bias and women face so many barriers. So the first thing is to get institutions to recognize and to commit to overcoming these barriers. So the Athena Swan key principles, or as it's called as a charter, explicitly gets institutions to recognize these 10 principles that I'm talking about. And of these, in interest of time, I'm going to really highlight 3 or 4, which is that there is a great deal of need for advancing gender equality in academia. You have to remove the obstacles to a sustainable career and demonstrate a commitment at senior and leadership level. Thank you so much, Nishita. You very nicely have put across the kind of barriers that young scientists face right at the beginning of their career. And thank you also, Bulamani, because you brought in the kind of problems that women will encounter at every step of their life. And it becomes very important that leadership level should commit to overcoming these. And it's possible now, because I believe that in the current decade, much change can happen. And it's a moral imperative for institutions to take all these problems and look at it within a quality framework. I also do believe that the vocabulary of institutions is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. Today you know that we are looking for data sharing, and be it NRF rankings or be it assessment accreditation framework of NAC or for engineering institutions. So there is widespread sharing of data, which is statutory. And so it is important that we build from here, and we look now at the qualitative changes that have to be brought in. So that said, Athena Swan, therefore, starting from the point that you explicitly admit and commit to making changes in the institutional environment and climate, therefore set up an assessment and accreditation framework. It is a tool for action and advancement. It nudges institution to look at the data, look at the evidence. Much of it can be qualitative, review the policies, and analyze these issues, and try to understand why exclusion is taking place, why there is underrepresentation, and where is this underrepresentation. So this has to be a very targeted self-assessment. It has to be formalized, and it has to lead after that to development of smart targeted action plans that have to be specific, they're measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And each institution, being unique, will have very unique problems, and they have to therefore in a participatory manner come up with this form of reflection and this form of moving ahead with action plans. And obviously this is not going to happen overnight. If you look at many of the kind of publications and so on, and it's very clear that it's going to take maybe 100 years or more if we are going to progress or make change at the rate at which we are doing. But here, with the kind of tool and institutional commitment that is happening due to Advanced HE's Athena Swan, within a time frame of 3 to 5 years, institutions have been able to show measurable difference. And because of this evidence-based framework, much of the landscape has changed. It has led to mainstreaming of issues of diversity and inclusion. It has nudged institutions to review practices and policies. It has nudged them to usher in systemic change. More importantly, and very difficult to measure, transform culture and environment. It has led to greater opportunity and support for women, and also is measured how institutions are helping in career progression. All this leads to an application which then is assessed and is awarded. So not only is excellence recognized and achievement awarded, there is an emphasis on sustaining the engagement and the actions that have been taken. And I will keep returning to this, establishing a community of practice, and community of practice being used herein as a technical term is the crux of the matter. We have to have a participatory community that is going to take this forward. So over 15 years now, from 2000 to 2015, a very large number of institutions have undergone this form of assessment and accreditation, which is valid for about 3 years. And they move from a bronze accreditation to a silver to a gold. In the bronze step, you're essentially collecting the data, identifying what changes you can bring in, and developing action plans. And while in silver, you're really going into the micro detailing and sustaining those. And the gold accreditation is really being a beacon of gender equity. And considering that more than 800 awards has been given, the success of this tool is at the moment much lauded. And that is why Athena Swan is what most of us have been talking about in India for quite some time. I think Rohini has written a lot about it, and the governments have been nudged to adopt it. In 2020, many more changes have taken place. Now the accreditation is for 5 years. Large number of medical institutions have been sworn institutions, but for them, there was also a linkage with funding. And that linkage to funding has been removed just recently. How it's going to impact the entire scheme remains to be seen, but Advanced HE is kind of fairly confident that it's not going to make much of a difference. So inspired by Athena Swan's success, a large number of global diversity and inclusion initiatives have been set up. Amongst them, the first, of course, Ireland joined very early enough in the scheme of things, and Australia joined later. It adopted Athena Swan essentially in the same format, but the way they have implemented it has a large number of innovative changes, and one can learn from it. And more recently, USA initiated Sea Change, again, the trust being for STEM equity achievement. And in other countries, diversity and inclusion is now being used in a very much a broader sense. It's not limited to gender, because Athena Swan 2 also started as a race equality charter. And as we, they've also now expanded to other disciplines, including arts, humanities, social sciences, business, and law. So the problems that most of these countries face is quite different from what we face in India, and how we will be able to negotiate similar schemes is also going to be different. And so it's most important that we should stay grounded, but our head certainly has to be in the clouds, because this is our moment to implement something innovative. So Gati, gender advancement for transforming institutions, as I said, was really conceptualized way back in 2019. Its charter also, just about many pieces of the jigsaw were ready. And we are going to now limit ourselves to women in science, technology, engineering, maths, and medicine. And it's a pilot. So as I said, DST looks at it as its scheme. And some of us will be, I'm going to be, have been helping with the framework, but I'm also finding my way. And it has to be participatory. So Rohini, thank you very much for your comment. Once this advertisement is on, and I have been, everywhere on social media and elsewhere saying it's a mission, come join, share, nudge your institutions to come on board. So it's most important that we should have a diversity of institutions coming in, joining the pilot, because it's from here that an advocacy group can emerge, and we can take it on to the national level. I'm optimistic. I'm very sure that it is going to be there in the at the national level, but it is the time frame that can be accelerated. And making a success of the pilot always allows you to carry forward a scheme. But more than that, the insight is going to be extremely valuable. So given that we will have hardly about 20 to 25 institutions, we have a tough job, because with the diverse educational system, you have the central universities, you have deemed to be universities, private, state universities. Within that, you have distinctiveness. I mean, you could have agricultural universities, you have regional engineering colleges, you have institutes of national importance, then of course the science and technology autonomous institutions funded by DST, DBT, ICMR, CSI, you just name it. And so given that big spectrum, who's going to come on to the pilot? So that is question one. And we have to at all times retain objectivity. We have at the same time to, we have landmines all over the place, because we all know what our government system is. And we all know that how difficult it is even to form collaborative groups to move forward. But this is the moment, and we just have to make this work rather well. So I myself am fumbling around, because very often, I would think that after much research or consultation, you do something, you wanted to go through without a comma being changed sometimes, and or only a consultative group being able to do that. But the structure is kind of nicely available right now. So British Council India is going to be partnering, and there's an agreement with DST, and they're already in touch with Advance HE. So Advance HE is again in touch with about 5 Athena Swan institutions. And the pilot Gati institutions will be linked up with the Athena Swan institutions, and a consultative mentoring, facilitation, capacity building program can be launched. At the same time, there's a whole, I forget this TTC, that's a company name. There's a third party evaluator for impact assessment, and they have to understand how scientific experiments work, that it's only when you have institutions onboarding that similar institutions would be required as a control. But a baseline data is extremely important if we are going to have measurable impact. And this is something that is new to our system. It is new to institutions, because we are so used to, innovation in India happens to be ad hoc. Governance is ad hoc, and policies you can just take a U-turn anytime or throw it out of the window. So the challenge is immense. But that said, the framework can lead us to a different mindset, a different way of doing things. At the moment, we are at a point where we have invited till 17 December institutions to onboard the pilot and do so through an expression of interest application. The idea was that one should get a synoptic view of the institution and data in whatever form is available. Certainly one doesn't want to bother people with, filling reams of paper. Much can be taken today from ASHE or from NRF and other, but we are really far from one nation, one data scenario. And it is validation of this data that is extremely important. I, however, do look at Gati as going beyond data, beyond really now first trying to prove that there is a deficit or there are gaps to be bridged. That is a given. But it's helpful to see what institutions are in a quick, whether they have this and they are willing to, in a systematic way, report, share this. And it gives a handle, it gives a criteria by which you can have onboarding onto the pilot. So institutions, as I've already said, have huge diversity. They have distinctive mandates. Some are more research oriented and others are more teaching. They have, that as the emphasis, and some fall right in between. The quality can change quite a lot as well. And so one is trying now to get them to report on the student and faculty gender ratios, but far more importantly, one is seeking out what are the gender initiatives that they have, what are the gender policies that they have, and what is the institutional culture. Now, how can a very brief application, which is an expression of interest application, get this out? So essentially, one is trying to see whether they are going to be able to endorse an Athena Swan kind of a charter. Obviously, the Gati charter is indigenous. We do not have gender pay gap as in the kind of the cohort that we are looking at. We don't have that as a problem. Or, contractual employment could be equally a problem for both men and women, where you have ad hoc appointments and so on. So how do we gauge institutional culture? Now, this is really going to be a challenge. And far more importantly, what is the institutional commitment right from the leadership? But just the leader doesn't make it. You have to have a community that's got to come forward, and it should not be left just on the woman. So I will take 2 minutes more. Okay. So, sorry. So obviously there has to be a nodal person or a steering group. And as I have said, the tools are going to be almost similar, but there would be indigenous variations. And one would bring in the experience from NRF and NAC and other accreditation processes that have taken place in India. So it's important, therefore, to nudge institutions now to identify the lacunae, examine their policies, reflect, ideate, and develop action plans. And they're not going to be alone in this, because they would be, as I've already indicated, they would be expert resource persons and resource material helping them. And one hopes that at the end of this, the pilot period, there would be some movement for accrediting institutions and looking at awarding that. So as I said, that there's going to be support for capacity building, community sensitization, and a participatory approach to these, this work. Now, much has been said, and I'm not going to go into specific details, but whatever stone you turn, there is something to be done there. And already, Gulomani has spoken about, and Radha has spoken about the kind of breaks in career that come, and how we have to enable not just those who are in profession, their promotions, the movement to senior roles or leadership roles and so on, but we also have to see that they're just not lost to the system. So there is much that needs to be done. And let me simply say, therefore, that we hope that Gati will catalyze this change. It will change the language. We will develop a new shared vocabulary. And I say this from experience because most institutions in India did not want to get accredited. But today, everybody has a quality assurance cell. And the kind of institution.
Pratibha, maybe we should wind up a bit.
Yeah, I'm winding up. So I think that this set of pilot institutions is not a critical mass. But today, it's not the critical mass we're looking for. We're looking at critical actors. And these critical actors shows the way forward. Thank you. Is my screen clear now?
Yeah. Thank you, Pratibha, very much.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think we are a little late, but I think we can take a few questions. Nilima, you are there now? Yeah, she seems to be going connection. There was Nishita had a question. Nishita?
Yeah, so I just had a question about this Athena Swan initiative. So I know that of the top UK.
Yeah, Pratibha, there's a question for you from Prajwal. Can you hear me?
No, Nilima.
Nishita is asking right now.
After that, we can take Prajwal's question. Yes, Nishita, please go ahead.
Yeah. Right. So I was just asking about Athena Swan, as is well known that for the top UK universities, except out of 5, 4 are still on bronze and only 1 is on silver. So my question is essentially, is there any incentive or disincentive for not reaching high standards on the Athena Swan? How is this implemented? Why is there an incentive for universities to follow this?
Incentive certainly is, I mean, you do want to promote gender equity, which is certainly an attribute that good institutions should be known by. And talking of the carrot and the stick for medical cohorts, the funding got linked because the government feels that, when so much funding is going to institutions, then it should not leave half the population behind. There have to be policies in place to ensure that women get they do recognition and support.
No, but will Gati do that? Will you?
Who has stayed on that? I mean, I was just happened to look at, I don't want to name institutions, but many have stayed there. So in a way, systems are large. Not all universities have gone for the entire university. Some are department based. So it is very interesting. I mean, I can't give cannot trivialize your question, but it's very interesting to go through those applications and read the reflective reports on where they feel that, yes, they agree that they haven't been able to get where they wanted to go and how they can go forward further. So one has to look at uniqueness of each institution and the reflective action plans. And one cannot beyond that trivialize. But what is important to see is that despite the fact that sometimes maybe they can be only 55% success or something like that, or that you can stay at the earlier award, say the bronze, not move on to silver over several cycles, but institutions have continued to participate in the program.
Maybe I think one question from YouTube, and perhaps we should close.
Yeah, I will take a couple of questions from YouTube, but I think we can try to keep answers a bit short so that we can probably at least address partially some questions. I think one of the questions is, what are the incentives for institutes, is already answered. There's one question about somebody saying that as a college teacher, he has an experience that 12th, I mean, this is not necessarily to Pratibha, but I think this is to the panel, that students at the HSC level, if you see, the boys are more trained to get for more marks, whereas girls think more logically. Is that the kind of experience which is people have seen? I don't know who would like to answer that question. I mean, firstly, I don't know whether this is a very universal thing or this is more felt by a person.
I think this is somebody's observation, and I think other people might have other conclusions. So I don't think this is gender related, actually. Speaking for myself, I think some people are more observant than others. And I wouldn't assign any gender to that.
Okay, so in general, I think the main things which are there on YouTube are a lot of appreciative comments, particularly both for the points made by Nishita and Bulmuni. So I think that also is resonated here. So maybe
Yeah.
we come back to and I'll let Prajwal take her question. That can be probably a last
Yeah.
one. Yeah, Prajwal.
Yeah, Pratibha, I had two questions for you. One is, I noticed that your gender category is binary. So I was wondering how you would accommodate non-binary perceptions and the whole younger population, which is oriented in thinking differently about gender. The second question is the 10.2 in the form. So I was wondering who in the institution is supposed to answer those questions, because some of those questions would have multiple answers, and in an institution, different people in an institution, even if you took just faculty in an institution, they would have different opinions about how they would answer that question. So I was wondering what the intent was there.
So on the, going the full spectrum of diversity, this has to be the decision at this of the scheme, and it's a pilot. So probably, the entire, there isn't, let us say, the expertise or the resources within the pilot, or more importantly, there isn't the will to look at that. So I would leave it at that. But I do understand that unless you look at complete spectrum of diversity and inclusion, much is being left behind and cannot be extrapolated further as we go along. Two, at the end of the day, institutions would have to ratify a charter. They would have to explicitly acknowledge. So that one expects that let the leader or a very senior level person just let us know what the perception is, because we too also have perceptual understanding of institutions. So let us at least see that how do they answer. It is something that is just, let us say it is to check out, is it a random answer, or what are their perceptions of their own institution? At the end of the day, it will have to be participatory. So, but the leader would have to ratify the charter. So essentially, you are asking, are you prepared for the charter?
For example, a question like, will students, faculty, and staff feel confident to voice their concerns? Do you expect the institutional leader to say yes or no, or maybe to that?
Because it's a Likert scale of 5. So let us see how these institutions will answer, because at the end, they would have to, once they onboard the pilot, they would have to say that we'll explicitly acknowledge that barriers exist.
I really apologize to have to now, but we need to wrap up. This has been really very interesting discussion, and many points have been brought out, I think, which people will can ponder over, and we should try to see if we can make some summary of this discussion and at least bring it out as a report for more people to read and be increase the awareness, because we can bring out a report for Physics News. Nilima, would you like to make the final wrapping up?
Yeah, so the idea to having this panel was not just to have a panel. People are having panels all over the place. But the idea to having this panel was to have an action plan. And I think Vandana has already made an excellent suggestion, which is to write this, is to make a report of this, make a report of the discussion today. So I think it would be nice, Vandana, let's just write something like Physics News, short report, okay? So that all the points get written down. And then I suggest that probably
can
you
I
and
suggest something? Why don't you write for
that.
current science? Because I mean, I know physics news because of IPA, but current science reaches a broader audience.
We could write for both.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And a broader audience, I don't know. I mean, but okay, it reaches another audience. And what we should do, and what I would really request everybody who's been here to do, especially the panelists, is to get together and formulate an action plan. Fine, we've come a long way, as we have seen. We need to go much further ahead. So what can we do? And that's all I have to say.
All right, thanks, Nilima. And as we said, we will definitely follow up. We will definitely come back to so it's not over. We are just going to take a break, and we will definitely summarize and try to get the report out soon before we forget everything. So on behalf of IPA, yeah. So on behalf of IPA for today's special session, I would like to thank Professor Ram Swami and Avan Chakravarti for this talk, and all the panelists, Professor Prajwal Shastri, Professor Radha Balkrishnan, Professor Sunil Mukhi, Dr. Nishita Desai, Dr. Bulumoni Kalita, and Dr. Pratibha Jolie for really and wonderful program. And last but not least, sincere thanks to Professor Nilima Gupte and Professor Shobna Narsihan for putting this program together. Thank you so much.
And thanks for putting it.
Vandana.
And thanks, Vandana, for all the dirty work. That was a huge amount of work. And thanks for it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank all the viewers for staying with us for 3 hours, almost 3 hours, and all the YouTube viewers also for there. Please broadcast the event, because the event will remain available for offline streaming, so offline viewing. So please tell your friends all about it, and interested people can view that. And do come back next Saturday at 5 o'clock for the IPA50 webinar. This time it will be by Dr. Kinshuk Dasgupta, who got the Bhatnagar Award for Baba Kavach.